Hello everyone, this is Maureen McKinney, Content Director at Phreesia. Welcome to today's webinar, Engage Your Employees for Practice Profitability and a Standout Patient Experience. It is no doubt a timely topic, particularly as a growing body of research shows the link between highly engaged employees and improved outcomes. But what factors drive engagement, and how do you know if your employees are really engaged? We're very fortunate to have Laurie Morgan with us today to help us answer those and other questions. Laurie's a senior consultant and partner at Capco & Morgan. Her practice management consulting work focuses on operational excellence, revenue capture, and the effective use of technology. In addition to her consulting work, Laurie is a popular speaker and author and the creator of the Management RX series of ebooks. Her recent title, The People-Profit Connection, Smarter Staffing for Practice Profitability, focuses on how the right staff using the right technology can elevate practice productivity, profitability, and patient service. Before we begin, I'd like to cover just a few housekeeping items. The webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, including Q&A at the end of the session. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question at any time. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can. For a better view of the presentation, you can also expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon. A quick word about Phreesia before we get started. Phreesia gives healthcare organizations a suite of applications to manage the patient intake process. Our innovative SaaS platform engages patients in their care and provides a modern, consistent experience while enabling our clients to maximize profitability, optimize their staffing, and enhance clinical care. To find out how Phreesia can give your organization the capacity for more, visit Phreesia.com. And with that, I will turn it over to our speaker, Laurie Morgan. Laurie?
Thank you, Maureen, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today. I'm so excited about this topic, engaging your employees for practice profitability and a standout patient experience. I love it because employee engagement is something a healthcare organization of any size can put a little bit more focus on and really improve many aspects of practice performance, the patient experience very clearly, financial performance, and even in some cases, as Maureen mentioned, patient outcomes. So, and also, I just have to add the really wonderful thing is that focusing on the on employee engagement usually costs nothing to do, and so it's a very exciting way for all of us to improve our practices and healthcare organizations. So before I dive in, just a quick overview of the topics I'm going to be touching on today. I'm going to talk a bit about the theory behind employee engagement, some of the research and academic scholarship on the subject of employee productivity and employee engagement. I'm going to explain a little bit about why I think great employees are really the key to having great healthcare organizations and great medical practices. I'm going to share some Surefire engagement boosters that my partners and I have seen in our consulting work, and also that have been validated by independent research, as well as some engagement killers that you might want to try to avoid. I'm going to talk a little bit about culture, your own organizational culture, and how it affects engagement. And then we'll have some time at the end for some closing thoughts and some questions. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the academic research and the field research related to employee productivity, human resources management, and leadership, because I feel like when I talk to people about employee engagement, there's this sense that it's sort of a hot new buzzword and it just kind of came out of nowhere, and does it really have a lot of rigor behind it? And the answer to that is yes. In fact, employee engagement is really not a brand new idea. It's more like the culmination and the summation of lots of different aspects of human resource management and lots of different discoveries and insights that have happened over the past 100 years or so. And so I wanted to just give you a very brief kind of rundown of some of the highlights of human resource management theory and discovery. So if we go back to about 1900, the early 1900s, a guy named Frederick Taylor kind of kicked off this whole idea of studying how we can make our organizations more productive and how, in particular, we can make employees more productive. And, it sounds like, wow, did we ever really need anyone to come up with that idea? But the reality was, at that time, employees were viewed as sort of interchangeable. Workers were hired, and the focus was more on the number of workers that you needed, not on differences between them. And Taylor's great insight, or one of his several great insights, was that specializing allows employees to become more productive as they learn how to do their jobs better. And Taylor's entire focus was on how do we get more out of our organizations, and he found that by allowing employees to focus on one area and become an expert in it, it really allowed the entire company, the entire firm, the entire organization to do better. Now, Taylor was not, looking at this from the point of view of enriching employees' lives. Rather, he was really looking strictly at organizational productivity, and that's why I think it's so useful to look at some of these great minds that have contributed to our shared understanding of how to manage our organizations, because they're not looking at this as like a fluffy type of subject. I think sometimes employee engagement kind of has that feeling, right? It has that sound like, oh, well, this is about morale, and of course we want everybody to enjoy their jobs, but it really goes far beyond that. And case in point, the next person on this little timeline is Henry Ford. Now, many people have heard of Henry Ford and regard him as a hero to working people. And the reason for that is that during the Depression, he took the radical step of dramatically increasing his employees' wages and at the same time cutting their work week down from 7 days to 5 days. So, many people believe that we all have Henry Ford to thank for this idea that we get a weekend. Now, of course, these were things that his employees really welcomed, but it's really a mistake to think that he did this because he was being generous or that this was all about altruism. Henry Ford had the incredibly important insight that a stable workforce makes for a much more productive and profitable organization. Now that insight, that turnover is very costly, is something that all of us have to grapple with all the time in our healthcare organizations, where everything, every type of healthcare organization is pretty labor intensive, and so we're always trying to balance the idea of our payroll budget and are we paying people enough and how do we keep people satisfied against the costs when people leave and the training time and the learning time to replace them and the disruption that creates. And so Henry Ford's contribution to this part of management thought is still with us today and still very important. Next, I want to look at two of these milestones together. We have Mary Parker Follett and Hawthorne. And, I want to look at these two together because they represent kind of a shift in thinking from Taylor and Ford, who are really focused on the structure of employees' jobs and how that would influence their ability to be productive. Follett observed that when managers actually put the time in to develop their own knowledge and they understand better the challenges that their employees are facing, they're going to do a much better job leading those employees because it earns them a higher level of authority with their employees. And if you think about this again is an idea that is so important to us today in healthcare, because so many conflicts arise when one part of the organization, say the administrative side, doesn't fully understand the priorities of the clinical side and vice versa. And so we all know, with goals like, for example, physician and hospital alignment, that it's very, very important to get people onto the same page. And Follett was really the groundbreaker there to understand how important that is and how much it contributes to a manager's ability to lead. Now, Hawthorne is not a person. Hawthorne refers to an electric plant. And the reason Hawthorne is included, you may actually have heard of the Hawthorne effect, which is basically the discovery that employees perform better when they are observed by their managers. And this is something that we actually deal with a lot in our consulting work. We want to make sure that the observations we're making inside of the practices and systems that we're working with are neutral, so the employees get used enough to seeing us around that they're not behaving differently than they would in their normal work. Well, this was really the great insight of the Hawthorne experiment. What they had set out to do was determine if the environment that employees work in makes a difference in their productivity. And in particular, they were really focused on lighting. And what they found was that managers were actually influencing employee productivity much more than the employees' surroundings. Finally, the next two links in this chain are what really push us towards our modern view of employee engagement. First, around in the 1960s and 70s or so, the academicians and consultants and others who really study trends and try to study how to improve our ability to lead in organizations realized that there was sort of a set of shared assumptions about employees and their motivation that until that point, most people had kind of just assumed were true. And the main idea was that employees work primarily for money, and they don't really have internal motivation, and the role of managers is just to make sure they keep doing their jobs and to keep them productive. Now, these new thinkers kind of looked at the modern economy, and they realized that people have a lot of choices for the type of work that they can do. And they also realized that modern workers are spending a big chunk of their lives, doing their work. And they concluded that employees, yeah, of course everyone needs to have a job for their income, but you know what, employees also want to feel like they're contributing, and they want to feel like they're doing a good job. They want to leave at the end of the day knowing that they've succeeded. And this was just a huge insight and a huge change in the way managers looked at leading their teams. And that ties directly into Japanese management. Now, I don't have the time to do this justice at all, but if you have an interest in this, I heartily recommend that you read up on the contributions that Toyota has made to the world of management, because it's really astounding and it ties right into this topic of employee engagement. And just very, very briefly, what Toyota observed is that in a factory manufacturing environment, errors are very costly, because what happens is a defect is created in the interior somewhere in the workings of an automobile, and if it's not corrected at that time, all the other parts of that car are being added onto it. The rest of the assembly is being built out. The car comes off the line. If you want to correct that defect, it's going to be much more costly to fix it after the fact. Furthermore, you may not even notice the defect. It may get into the hands of a customer. The customer will be dissatisfied. It will be a hit to Toyota's reputation. And so understanding this idea that preventing errors is so much more important than, or so much more valuable than correcting them on the back end, that you could really save a lot of money. Toyota also realized that the people in the best position to spot those defects right when they happen were the employees, and that meant right on down to the lowest level workers in their assembly plants. And it was really a big shift, because previously there was this idea that managers had to be all-knowing, and the employee's view was not always sought. But Toyota said, hey, wait a minute, we're going to allow any employee working on our assembly line to actually stop the production line if they see something that's going wrong, and allow that problem to be fixed. And they said that, look, you know what, we can do this because we know our employees want to put out a quality product, and we trust them to only stop the line when it's something important that needs to be corrected. It was a massive shift, and people are still studying Toyota today. I don't know if any of you listening are old enough to remember the oil crisis in the 70s, but at that time, Japanese cars started coming into the U.S. They were praised for having not just incredible fuel economy versus our, American autos, but also they were incredibly reliable. And this was kind of the beginning of an awakening, right, where we all wanted to know, how did Toyota do it? And it really all started with focusing on employees and trusting them. And that's kind of at the heart of this idea of employee engagement. It really kind of brings us up to where we are today. So there are lots of different definitions for employee engagement out there, and they all kind of circle around the same concepts. Basically, an engaged employee has an emotional connection and a deeper commitment to their work than an employee who isn't engaged. And that allows them to take the initiative and spot opportunities to improve even small things just as they're happening, or to contribute to bigger initiatives that your practice or your hospital or your healthcare organization may want to undertake. The employee who is engaged is kind of like your boots on the ground, seeing how patients are reacting to the service that you're providing and having that opportunity to go the extra mile because they actually really care about your organization and aren't just working for the money. They're not just following the script of their job. So Gallup, the famous polling organization, has been doing a landmark study of employee engagement for over 15 years now, and they've covered a wide variety of industries, including healthcare, and they've gathered an incredible amount of data. And what they found is really kind of a bad news, good news sort of story. As you can see from the slide, they found that less than a third of employees are actually engaged in their jobs. Now, Gallup defines engagement as being enthusiastic and involved with their jobs. And rather than having those feelings, they found that the majority of people are indifferent, sleepwalking through their day without regard for their performance or their organizations. Now, Gallup is looking at all types of industries, and so from their perspective, they really wanted to sound the alarm on growth and innovation being put at risk because employees aren't committing to the fullest to their work. But in our world, of course, there are other problems that can come from employees not being as fully engaged and involved. Certainly patient safety, patient service. I mean, we have some really big things that we have to deal with, right? If patient outcomes are affected, of course, the consequences can be really devastating. So, this is something where we really have to think about, well, how can we make sure that our employees are in that 1/3 who are engaged? And I guess I'm getting to the good news part of the Gallup study, because what they found is that 70% of engagement variance is due to management. In other words, managers have a huge impact on whether or not their employees are engaged. Now, there's a little bit more negative news here because, of course, that huge impact swings both ways. In many cases, employees actually end up leaving their jobs because they want to escape their manager. But on the plus side, you're all here listening in to this talk because you want to understand how you can be among those managers that are positively influencing employees and their engagement with your organization. So this next chart is a little bit hard to read, and I apologize. It couldn't be enlarged for the slide, but if you would like a link to it, just send me a note after the talk, and I'll be happy to send it over. Basically, these are some objective data that connect back to engagement, and I thought these would be really interesting for any of you who want to kind of lead an engagement effort inside your organization and really need some hard factual data to be able to share with the doctors who own your practice or the administrators above you in the organization. So just really quickly, what Gallup did is they looked at the top and the bottom quartiles of their database that they've created, related to employee engagement, the survey data they've been capturing for more than a decade. And they found that within the top quartile of engaged employees, in other words, the most engaged employees, there were some significantly observable differences in very, very important areas versus the lowest quartile. Now, if you look at the right-hand side of this chart, basically those are positive attributes that we all want to improve in our organizations. In the evaluations of our work by customers, in our case, patients, productivity and profitability, all of those were significantly improved in the high engagement organizations versus the lowest engagement organizations. And I also want to call your attention to the left side. So the left side, the lighter colored bars, focus on negative attributes that we all want to reduce. And the good news here is that even more of a difference was made in the high engagement organizations. Even more of a difference was noticed in the high engagement organizations. And in particular, I want you to look at the second bar from the right among the lighter colored bars. And you can see that that has to do with patient safety incidents. Now, I mentioned that Gallup is studying all kinds of organizations, and healthcare is definitely on their radar. And what they found was that among the healthcare organizations that had the most engaged employees, there was a 41% difference, 41% fewer patient safety errors than in the organizations that had the lowest level of engagement. That is a huge difference and so significant and so important. And it's easy to visualize why that is the case, because if you've got employees that feel invested in how things are run inside of your organization, then they're going to be more likely to go that extra mile and to sort of be on the alert to how things are going and to spot things that could create problems. Now, obviously, reducing safety errors, that would be an admirable goal for any of our organizations. And, you know, we also have, there are also other trends that can really benefit, or that spotlight the need that our organizations have to engage our employees and to take advantage of having a more engaged workforce. And I wanted to hit on a few of those as well. So patient service. Now, of course, we all want to have a wonderful patient experience, but the key thing here is that this is becoming ever more important. And the biggest reason for that is that employees are so much more empowered to evaluate the patient experience. They can go online, they can write a review on Google, on HealthGrades, they can even write reviews in some cases at their payers' website. So you know, we're getting direct feedback from patients now, and we need to understand, you know, what their experience is like, and having engaged employees that are dealing with patients as they're making their way through our practices is the best way for us to get that feedback and to prevent problems. We also have a need for greater physician productivity, and you know, of course, we are always looking for ways to make our physicians and non-physician providers more productive. But as we look ahead to value-based care, or value-based reimbursement models, you know, it's going to be that much harder for physicians to do it all, and they really are going to need to rely on staff to help them with so many of the challenges that are going to be associated with these new models, and engaged employees are going to be absolutely central to that. And then finally, you know, we have kind of a boom in technology. I focus a lot on front office technology. I feel like there are so many amazing tools that have come down the pike recently that can really make things easier for your practice, but it also adds complexity, and engaged employees can really help with managing that as well. So just really quickly, this company called Bright Local has been surveying you know, local consumers about their local shopping habits for the last 5 or 6 years. And the main takeaway here is that if you look on this right set, the far right set of 3 bars, you know, just as recently as 2010, 29% of people said they didn't read online reviews before they considered whether a local business is good or bad. That number has now shrunk to just 9% as of 2016. It's just becoming a part of the way all of us look for local services and you know, any kind of local vendor, even healthcare. Now, this idea that patients are rating practices and rating physicians gets many of the physicians that we work with very nervous, because they feel like patients aren't really in a position to evaluate clinical performance. And there's a lot of truth right in that statement, but the reality is that when patients are reviewing your practice, they're more than likely focusing on things that have absolutely nothing to do with clinical expertise. And as this article from Becker shows, you know, the front desk staff, problems with billing, problems with just navigating the practice, scheduling, all the administrative side of things are much more likely to be cited in a negative review. And so we shouldn't get so alarmed about the fact that patients are writing these reviews. What we should be doing is using the information they're providing us as an opportunity to improve. And of course, once again, your staff on the front lines are the first ones to spot workflow problems and other issues that could be degrading that patient experience. I mentioned that having more support for physicians is going to be so much more important as we shift to more value-based reimbursement. There's an emphasis on teams. More coordination is going to be required across practices, across healthcare organizations. And, physicians just can't do all of that themselves. They really need engaged, motivated employees who are going to sort of be their eyes and ears and make sure things aren't slipping through the cracks. There also is going to be a need to deploy more technology and use it more effectively, and that also requires people to be really motivated for the learning curve they're going to be facing. And, this whole idea of value-based reimbursement is just more complicated, and it really requires more attention, more involvement for everyone to understand it and make sure that our organizations are going to be able to get paid for the work that we do. Now, I mentioned that technology adds complexity, and one of the things that we observe in our work with practices is that there are frustrations that every clinic, every organization, every practice that we work with seem to share, things like dealing with high deductible plans and collecting from patients, no-shows, and making sure that you minimize them and patients are effectively reminded. And yet, there are also excellent technology tools to help practices address a lot of these issues. And interestingly enough, last year we did a survey where we spoke with physicians in all kinds of organizations all across the country. We asked them what problems bothered them the most, and then we asked them about the technology tools that specifically address those problems. What we found was that physicians were, for the most part, not all that aware of the tools that were out there that could help them. And in many cases, the tools are things that already exist inside of the EHRs they've deployed or inside of their practice management systems, and they just weren't activated. And the reason for that, I think, is that we get so many notifications from our platform vendors, and we hear about so many new technology tools that can be added on or unleashed within our systems, and it just becomes a sort of information overload. Now, if you have engaged employees on your staff who are interested in technology, this becomes a perfect opportunity to expand their job a little bit, recognize them for their talents and for their interests, and allow them to take the lead in helping make sure that your organization is taking advantage of these tools that are out there that can really increase productivity and make your practice just run much better. So I mentioned that Gallup now has this enormous database. They've been collecting data for years and years, and that has also allowed them to figure out the keys for how managers can actually foster engagement. And they really narrowed it down to 3 important leadership behaviors. Number 1, communicating richly. What I always tell our physician leaders and administrative leaders that we work with, if you don't feel like you're over communicating, then you're probably not communicating enough. There's always a tendency to under communicate, and when you actually put an emphasis on communicating, it really makes everyone feel like they're part of the same team and helps them engage. Clearly defining performance goals. The idea here is that people just want to know what it takes for them to feel successful in their work. And then finally, focusing on strengths instead of weaknesses. Look, we all know that our managers are there to help us do better on the things that we are not doing well. But you know what? We also know that we have strengths that we're bringing to our jobs, and we just want to know that they're appreciated. It's really a very simple idea, just a little appreciation for those unique talents that your employees are bringing to the tasks of their job, the things that you would miss if they weren't there doing their jobs. It goes such a long way to making people feel like they're part of something important. Now, the important thing to notice here, it's not at all about the money. It's not even mostly about the money. Compensation doesn't even, come up to the top 3 here. It's really about how managers can encourage employees and make them feel part of a team. Employees crave meaningful recognition, not just you're doing a great job, but you know what, I really appreciate the way you have improved collecting those co-pays, Sarah. Or, you know what, I'm so amazed that our denial rate is approaching 0, Vivian. You know, we've got very specific metrics that we can look at, and when you use those to encourage employees, it really makes them understand that you are noticing the work that they're doing. Employees also want a sense of ownership. They want to feel like there's a little piece of the mission of your organization that they're responsible for, and you know, it's their job to get that done, and the organization really depends on it. And they also want to know that they can trust you and that you trust them. And that comes from creating a more open environment and also really focusing on always being as fair as possible. So I just want to talk really quickly about some engagement boosters that we've observed at Capco and Morgan. These tie into those sort of overarching ideas that Gallup came up with. These are some specific things that I think any practice or healthcare organization can use to get their employees more involved. So first of all, on the communication side, you know, just as the Gallup research showed, in our experience, communication is enormously important to making employees feel involved, and that means regular meetings. You know what? We work with so many practices that hate having meetings, and we've all been there, you know, for a meeting that is just a waste of time. But the answer is not to do away with meetings altogether. The answer is to commit to having more organized and more productive meetings. Communication, you know what, Gallup talked about the goals. Communication can also be a great way to articulate the organization's goals and also the roles that people are supposed to play inside of your organization. So there's less chance of confusion about who to go to with a particular type of problem. Ultimately, what you want to do with your communication strategy is just create that sense of teamwork. Professional development. This is a great way to show that you are interested in your employees' growth and that you are committed to them just as you want them to be committed to you. Training and continuing ed. Sometimes we forget that employees at all levels can benefit from that, not just clinicians. Growth opportunities. Now, that doesn't have to mean a promotion. It can simply be an opportunity to expand knowledge and learn a new skill. Employees will value any type of investment you make in their career. And then, of course, I mentioned meaningful supportive feedback, specific feedback that's tied to what your employee actually does and his or her specific strengths. Finally, on the shared morale front, I think it's really important, and we often forget to do this in our healthcare organizations, sharing and celebrating even tiny victories. There are so many little things, so many little details that have to be managed every single day inside of any kind of healthcare organization. And when we improve even a little bit on those things, it can make a big difference to our bottom line. So you know what? Call it out. When you have that meeting, it's a great opportunity to say, hey, you know what? We collected 99.5% of our co-pays this month. That is a record for us, and you know what? Everyone here deserves a hand for that. Even little things like that, on up to big things like, wow, we finally completed the recognition for a patient sent on the medical home. That was a huge deal, and of course we want to celebrate that. Celebrate all of the positives because you know you're going to have to pay attention to the things that go wrong. Try to give some time to the things that go well. Recognition programs for employees, of course, those kinds of things can be wonderful encouragement. And then finally, I think most of all, remember what our mission is about. You know, I mentioned early in the talk that employees have options. They don't have to work in healthcare. They could work in some other field. Many of us are drawn to this field because we're attracted to not just the type of work that we're doing, but the mission. There is an underlying mission in healthcare that is so positive, and it never hurts to remind people of that. We're doing really important work. Now, there are also a few pitfalls that we've seen in our work, and you know, things where engagement can kind of hit a speed bump, if you will. And so I just want to talk through a few of these because these are things I really recommend that you avoid if you're trying to create that feeling of team and shared mission. So on the communication side, secrecy. You know what, if you're the kind of organization where a lot of private meetings are happening behind closed doors, just be aware that that can sometimes make employees feel nervous. Either they're out of the loop or maybe even You know, who knows? Their imaginations can run wild. Sometimes they may think that layoffs are coming, or, you know, there are all kinds of you know, awful things that can be imagined when people feel that they're being kept out of the loop. So try to keep secrecy to a minimum. Not dealing with problems as they come up. It's just really important, especially if employees are coming to you and they're saying, look, we're having an issue with this piece of technology or this particular vendor, and no one is helping them to resolve it. It's very discouraging, and you don't want employees to be discouraged, and stop noticing these things and stop bringing them to your attention, because, of course, they're the ones who can let you know when things are not working right. Failed commitments. You know, it's funny. I'm always surprised when we go into our practice assignments, we speak to every single employee in the organizations that we work with, or we try to anyway. We try to get to as many as we can. And things that would seem to not matter at all really can get under employee skin. For example, we worked with a practice recently that had been contemplating getting a new AHR. And the administrator had let everyone in the organization know, hey, we're looking into this. We'll keep you posted, but, you know, it's something that may be coming down the road. Well, unbeknownst to that administrator, the employees were actually really excited about this. I mean, it was something new that they could learn. They saw some flaws in the current system. They were looking forward to sharing, you know, what they would seek in the new system. Well, the project got derailed for very valid reasons, but the administrator and the physicians never went back and told the employees this. And the employees were kind of hurt. I mean, it's funny, the administrators thought, well, I didn't think that they would care. You know, it just meant less work for them, no conversion. But the reality was it made the employees feel out of the loop. And so just, you know, keep in mind that you need to close the loop, even on little things that you know, seem like they may not be that important. Professional development, I mentioned before how important it is. The flip side is if you're doing things that undermine professional development, that can be a real engagement buster. For example, if there just aren't opportunities to learn more, or if you or the managers and supervisors underneath you are in the habit of micromanaging, makes employees feel like they can't stretch their wings and that you don't trust them, and so that can really undermine their sense of engagement. And then, of course, the blame game. You know, when things go wrong, it's always tempting to try to find a culprit. I think the better way to approach that is to look for what went wrong rather than who was responsible, and try to figure out how to prevent it without necessarily assigning blame, because many times the problem is actually something in the system or in the workflow, and not necessarily because the employee wasn't trying hard enough. And actually, that brings me to the last column on the morale front. If employees feel like they're set up to fail because the workflow processes that we have in place are just outdated and they're too complicated to manage, that can be a real drain on morale. Or, you know, similarly, if the employee feels they haven't been trained up well enough to do their job well. Then finally, just really briefly about nepotism and favoritism. You know, in larger organizations, there are usually rules that prevent this from happening, but sometimes in smaller practices, we see that administrators or physician owners and partners feel more comfortable bringing in a relative or a close friend or their spouse to do important jobs inside the organization because they're nervous and they want to be able to trust whoever is in a critical job. The problem is that although you can trust that person, the presence of someone who has such a close tie to you outside of the workplace can undermine the trust that employees have in you and also in that person. And so it's something we always recommend that practices avoid. So I just want to talk a little bit about how bad systems can defeat good employees. I've talked about being set up to fail, and that's really the essence of this idea. And I think this happens a lot in our organizations these days, and it's really nobody's fault. What tends to happen is that our needs change, and then we start adding on new procedures, and more of them, they sort of get piled on. And what happens is the workflow starts to become unmanageable. I noticed this particularly with billing and with the front desk and with scheduling, where we're all trying to do our best to prevent things like claims being denied for eligibility or patients not being prepared to pay. And so a lot of really kind of like Rube Goldberg-esque workflows have emerged in recent years in many, many healthcare organizations because there have been so many new challenges to cope with. And what happens is the people in your organization, they want to do a good job, but sometimes it just becomes too easy to make a mistake because there are manual workarounds that are required, or workflow rules that involve a lot of duplication of effort. And so the employee, again, they feel like, I'm doing my best, but it's just too easy to make a mistake. And then also, another example of a bad system implementation that can really defeat your well-intentioned and hardworking employees is when responsibility isn't clear, or when who's accountable isn't clear. And one example of this that we see fairly often is that you have an administrator over the entire organization who is technically also responsible for the nursing and the MA teams, but the nurses are taking a lot of direction from the clinical side, from the physicians that they're working with, and from nurse supervisors and others on the clinical side. And so sometimes the administrator can't get done what needs to get done because they are not perceived to have authority by the people on the clinical side. And this can happen in the other direction as well. And it's just important to make sure that you communicate, in what areas are you supposed to take direction from the administrative side of the practice, so that the people know and so that administrators aren't held accountable for things that they can't get done. Similarly, responsibility without authority. A really interesting example of this that comes up a lot is that you may have a physician who's really slow to sign off on their charts, and as a result, that's affecting billing and collections. Maybe the billing department is getting in trouble because perhaps there have been some timely filing denials, or perhaps the billing department is going to that physician's MA and saying, hey, you got to get him or her to sign off on those charts. And of course, the MA you're going to feel pressured from that, but they really can't, force the physician or the nurse practitioner to do that. And so, understand that it can be very defeating for an employee, and it can cause them to disengage if they feel like they're responsible for something that they really can't make happen. Also, I mentioned how the activities sort of creep up, especially, I mentioned like at the front desk. I've worked in so many practices recently where the number of tasks that everyone has to do in the hope of preventing a denial, or in the hope of preventing patients from not realizing they have to pay, has just ballooned. And you can't, it's hard when you're in the middle of it to see the forest for the trees. You don't really realize it because it happens so gradually that the systems have become kind of unworkable, and it's really not the employee's fault. And so, I like to recommend, like, at the start of the year, many practices are kind of slow because of the deductible reset. That can be a really good time to take a look at your workflow and see how you can use technology better and how you can reorganize things to make things flow more efficiently and make it easier for employees to get things right. The other thing, of course, is that at the front desk, another good example is that they're much more responsible for collecting now than they were 10 or 15 years ago, and that requires a different set of skills. Really important to make sure that people are trained up for the responsibilities that they have today, not just the responsibilities that they had 5, 6 years ago when they joined your practice. I mentioned that growth opportunities do not have to mean promotions. I think even when people have an opportunity to learn that may boost their resume, give them a chance at some future point to earn more money, or just feel like you're investing in them, that is going to boost their engagement with your organization. Some ways you can do this without actually giving people promotions, even something simple like cross-training or allowing some of your employees to work in floating roles throughout the practice can give people a little bit of a boost of variety. Continuing education, of course, very important for every area of the practice. New certifications. We've worked with a number of practices that have had clinical trials. Of course, this is very common in larger hospital-owned systems, and sometimes that means you have to add a new type of technician. Maybe you need a phlebotomist, or maybe you need someone to operate a DEXA scan. Well, you know, it's become sort of routine to just post a job, start running an ad, and try to find someone to fill that job. But it may be better to actually train up somebody who's already in your organization. You may be able to get someone who already knows everything else about your practice and is very committed to it, and who will be very grateful for the chance to learn something new. And then on top of that, you know, you may not even have to pay as much or go through the cost of actually recruiting someone for that role. I mentioned before the patient-centered medical home and chronic care management. These are big initiatives that require a lot of focus, and they also can create opportunities for employees to grow into a new kind of role inside of your practice. I also mentioned that technology has been changing so fast it's easy to overlook some of the most promising improvements, even things that are available to you for free inside of your existing systems. But you know what, most practices, clinics, hospitals that we work with, you find there are people that emerge who are the sort of de facto expert on the systems, the person that everybody goes to ask questions about how to use the EHR or how to fix a template. And you know, they don't have a formal title, but everyone knows that they're the person to ask. Well, you know, why not give the person that title? Acknowledge them for the work that they're doing that's really helping out your practice. Finally, online reputation management, that is becoming ever more important. I mentioned about patient reviews, and it's something that can easily slip through the cracks. If you have someone on your team who's really interested in social media, loves technology, this can be a great growth opportunity for that person. You know what, back to our good friend Henry Ford and another one of his important insights. Sometimes I feel like healthcare organizations and practices may be afraid to train up employees because it's almost like you're preparing them to leave your practice. But Henry Ford said, you know what, the only thing worse than training employees and having them leave is not training them and having them stay, because you have to keep them engaged, and you also are relying on them to continually improve their skills, right? As you think about engaging them and relying on them for more, it's that much more important that they have they are familiar with all the latest technology and that their skills are absolutely up to date. Lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about the role of culture, because there's a fantastic study that really has some observed, objective data about how important culture can be in terms of engaging employees. And the University of Michigan did this study. They looked at the implementation of what they called positive management practices in 29 nursing units within a single hospital system. And the idea is they wanted to compare the units that did these positive practices against the other units of the hospital that didn't take this initiative. So the practices that they wanted to emphasize, the management practices that they wanted to promote and the culture they wanted to create involved compassionate support, emphasizing positive and inspiring messages, forgiving mistakes, emphasizing gratitude and confidence, articulating the meaningfulness of the work being done, and emphasizing respect and integrity. So these are all management traits that they wanted their leaders to emphasize in dealing with their employees. The results of this were profound. The units that had the most success in implementing these positive ideas saw dramatic increases in patient satisfaction with pain management, in their willingness to recommend the hospital system to other patients, and they also had measurable improvement in direct signs of engagement, 35% more improvement in nurse-physician relationships, participation in hospital affairs, foundations of care quality, and other measures that directly indicate how engaged and how willing to go above and beyond those employees were. So remember, when it comes to culture, that as a leader, you are setting the tone, but every employee that you bring into your organization influences that culture. So what's really important when you're looking to hire new employees, understand what your culture is and take the time to find people who will fit with it, take the time to onboard them well, to get them off to a good start, and understand that their fit within the culture of your organization can make a huge difference in whether or not they become fully engaged. Now, in Silicon Valley, there's a really famous saying, hire slow, fire fast. And the idea behind this is that in the startup culture of Silicon Valley, Each employee that you add to a really small company can make a huge difference, either positive or negative. But you know what, if you think about our healthcare organizations, in our cases, most of the time, each employee has the opportunity to make a really big impact, positive or negative as well, right? Within our own little world of our clinic or our team, each employee can make a big difference. And one great one can really elevate the team. A bad fit, on the other hand, can bring everybody down. It's just really important to think about that and move slowly and make sure you're very, very careful in your hiring, because it's not easy once you've brought someone on board who isn't a good fit to let that person go. Also think about whether what you really need is experience in a particular job, or are you actually looking for a set of traits that would allow that person to learn and thrive within your organization. Lastly, I just wanted to share a little bit of inspiration from some famous business leaders that I think really relates to this topic of employee engagement. And I'll start with Richard Branson. He said, "I've always believed that the way you treat your employees is the way they will treat your customers, and that people flourish when they are praised." So here's the idea. I like to think of it as the patient experience starts with the employee experience. Zig Ziglar said a similar kind of thing. You don't build a business, you build people, and then people build the business, right? There's only so much an individual leader can do. You're really relying on everyone underneath you to take your organization to the next level. And then finally, Peter Drucker, we always love to quote, we always love to share this quote, because it's really important to realize that employees have options, and you have to accept the fact that you have to treat everyone on your team as a volunteer. They can leave, and as the Gallup study showed, how we manage our employees, how we lead our organizations is in fact one of the most common, if not the most common, reason that people will actually disengage and ultimately leave our organizations. And with that, I will pass it back over to Maureen for our Q&A.
That was great, Laurie. Thank you so much. A reminder, everyone, submit your questions, and we have several already in the queue. The first one, how do I gauge employee engagement in my own organization? Are there particular questionnaires that you would recommend?
So I think a great place to start is to go to the Gallup website or go to the advisory board website. Both of these organizations have a lot of information about measuring engagement, and in the case of Gallup, of course, it may even be possible to participate in that ongoing study that they're doing.
Great. Oh, here's a good one. Where should I start? So for organizations that are kind of thinking, this isn't something I've thought about before, what are the first steps? What's that low-hanging fruit that they should focus on?
Well, I think that the first step absolutely has to be to start talking to your employees, and that may be one-on-one, that may be in meetings. If you haven't been having meetings, now is a really good time to start. I touched on this a little bit in the talk. It's easy to think that meetings aren't important, but you know what? Well-run meetings are they're of such value to employees. It really makes them feel like they're part of the team when everyone can be brought together and concerns can be aired, victories can be celebrated. So number one, I guess I would say, if you're not meeting regularly with your team, start thinking about how you're going to do that and how you're going to make sure that it's productive. And then also start talking to people, start getting their feedback. Make sure that if you have managers underneath you, that they're actively soliciting feedback from the people that work for them. Let employees know that you really value their input, and you also really want to understand how things are going.
Here's another one, Laurie. You mentioned emphasizing employee strengths instead of weaknesses, but what should I do when an employee's performance is really a problem?
Well, this is a very good question, because as I mentioned towards the end of the talk, when you have one employee who's not pulling their weight, it can really drag down the entire team. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to just make clear that if there are negative things, you do need to address those as well. But one thing I think is really important is to emphasize fairness when you're dealing with issues of employee performance. So first of all, make sure you understand if the employee is really responsible for the things that are going wrong. some things are very obvious, like if it's an attendance problem or punctuality, some of these things are much more clear-cut. But if there are mistakes that are happening, is it really the employee's fault, or do you have an issue of systems, like I was explaining? Do you need to look at your workflow? And then on top of that, and probably more important, remember that when you're dealing with problems or dealing with delicate issues with employees, it's really important to do it sensitively, do it privately. You don't want everyone on the team to be aware that you're having a disciplinary conversation with a certain employee. There's an old saying, praise publicly and criticize privately, and I think it's really a good rule of thumb. You want to address things as respectfully as you can, give the employee a chance to improve, make sure you understand also if there are training issues or system issues that are making it harder for that employee to succeed.
So we have another question, Laurie. I'm a manager in a large organization. Can I implement some of these ideas just in my clinic, even though they are perhaps not part of our overall organizational strategy?
I love this question because I think that change can absolutely start in an individual clinic. There's no cost involved usually. You're really just talking about the kind of atmosphere and the kind of environment you're creating as a leader. And so there's really not a lot of reason for anyone above you in the organization to object to you doing this. And then the flip side of it is, if you embark on a project like this, embark on an effort to try to enhance your culture and engage your employees more fully, start measuring it. Measure with surveys, see if there's a trend related to errors or your results, and that may even be something you can present to the people alongside you in the organization or above you in the organization to show the impact of an employee engagement program. And you may even, be that, you may be the little spark that ignites an employee engagement effort throughout your entire organization.
And then here's another one. Can you please explain more about what you meant by online reputation management and how perhaps an employee could own that task?
Yes, thank you for asking me about that, because I did sort of go through that rather quickly. So online reputation management refers to managing your physicians or your practices or your healthcare organization's online presence. And by that, I'm referring primarily to things like how you appear in Google, what kind of reviews are showing up on the different physician reviews and rating sites, how accurate the information is in all of those locations, how accurate your information is even in your payer directories. One of the things we always find when we work with healthcare organizations of any size is that there is a lot of incorrect information out there about your physicians and about your organization as a whole, and it's really very damaging actually to your practice's productivity, your profitability, because what can happen is you may be turning patients away. For example, if you're not properly listed in the payer directory for a plan that you accept, then when a patient goes to look in that directory to see who's available to them, you're not going to be on that patient's radar. And the other type of error that comes up a lot is that they may have you listed at an old address. We've seen physicians listed on some of these rating sites with information about their location that hasn't been true for 15 or 20 years because the systems themselves, the reviews and rating sites, they're relying on databases that sometimes get outdated, right? So they may show one of your physicians as still working at the place that they did their residency a decade or more ago. So there's a lot of work to be done to keep up on all this stuff, and there's a huge amount of upside because if the information is accurate, you have that chance to capture a prospective patient, and then of course if you're getting a lot of positive reviews, that is a wonderful form of marketing that is almost free to implement. There is a fair bit of legwork, however, and so that's why I suggest that it can be kind of a job enrichment area for somebody on your team that's interested in social media and interested in the internet, because they can work on this stuff a little bit at a time. Basically, it involves going out and connecting with all of these different databases, making sure the information is correct, and then spiffing up the listings that are out there. So, for example, in most cases, you're able to put a picture of the physician. You can put a link back to your own website. You can put information about your hours. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you can put out there that serves patients really well, makes it easier for patients to find you, and it's free other than the effort required.
Well, Laurie, I know we could keep chatting for long past our hour. There's so many great things to talk about, but that brings us to the end of the webinar. I want to thank you, Laurie, for a wonderful presentation. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us.